today our guest is Kelly Mansfield. And we will be discussing Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Kelly, can you tell us what genre this is?
Hedwig is a semi-biographical story, and we're going to discuss the Broadway adaptation from 2014 with Neil Patrick Harris.
Who is the author?
The book was written by James Cameron Mitchell and the music by Stephen Trask.
What was the plot?
Hedwig's the story of an East German boy who has a sex change operation in order to leave East Germany and marry an American GI and get out of Berlin.
I'm interested in the analyzation.
Okay. So
Perspective of this play. What do you think Freud would say about this?
So Freud's theories deal with the subconscious. We're motivated and driven by our unconscious needs, desires, and fears. Hedwig is driven by his need to be accepted, as he is. The play begins with the song Tear Me Down, which essentially deals with the concept of the Berlin Wall being torn down and enabling those people to re-enter society. That's also a metaphor in this play for Freud's need to tear down the wall between himself and the heterosexual population and be accepted by everyone. He also, in this part of the story, refers to the hotel in which the play is being done as a sanctuary for everyone to be, where there's acceptance for everyone.
Was the wall between Hedwig and others, or is it an internal struggle?
It's a little bit of both. The more obvious part of the story is the struggle for acceptance by others, which is an external struggle that Hedwig has. And he especially wants to be accepted by his partner, Tommy. The internal struggle that's happening is the struggle between Hedwig and himself and his own acceptance of who he is and what he has become. Throughout the play, you see evidence that he's been taught to hide his true self away. Early in the book, he talks about how he used to sing in the oven because his mom made fun of his singing. So he would hide in the oven and sing songs, and he would always sing backup because he was always afraid to sing the main parts. And his mom would actually hide herself away too and do all of her sculpting and art in the shower. And I think that's just part of society that they grew up in. You had your life that you presented to the world in East Germany, and then you had the things that you hid away that weren't acceptable. And Hedwig compartmentalizes himself like that, even now that he's left East Germany.
And what about the costuming of the show?
The costuming really highlights the defenses that Hedwig has developed over the course of his life to be able to navigate this world in which he's afraid of acceptance. So in the beginning of the show, he starts out with these big wigs and ornate hairdos, and he wears a lot of makeup and false eyelashes and all kinds of things like that. And then as the show goes on, the costumes get a little bit less and a little bit less. In fact, at one point in the show, Hedwig says something to the effect of, "Get this dead thing off of me." And it's questionable whether or not he's referring to the fur coat that he's wearing or the wig that's on his head. Which brings us to another part of his armor, and that's the wig itself. The wig is just his ability to turn from a man into a woman and hide behind this facade. And he starts wearing these big ornate wigs after the American GI leaves him, and he finds himself alone and penniless and afraid, and he finds that he can put on these wigs and turn into another person. And he sings a song about, "I put on my makeup," and it talks all about how he can turn into Farrah Fawcett or anyone else he wants to be but himself. But in the end, he has to take off the makeup and the wigs, and all that's left is himself. And then at the end of the show, when he finally does let go of all of his defenses, he appears with no makeup on, no wigs, just himself, no costuming. It's just Hedwig.
Freud talks a lot about parents and how they influence life. Can you say that in this play?
Absolutely, and I think I'd rather approach this from a Lacan's perspective. Lacan's.
What is Lacan's theory?
Oh, good job pronouncing that name correctly. I clearly botched it. So Lacan's theories were all about language, and they believed that language is the way that children entered into our culture. And Lacan also believed that all of language is directed by the mother. So the mother is the person who teaches the child about culture and helps them and teaches them about language, and that language helps them enter into culture.
How does this apply to Hedwig?
Well, there are a couple of interesting things that apply to Hedwig. First of all, Hedwig's father is also a GI soldier, which I think is interesting considering that that's the same route that he took. So he's an American soldier, and he leaves when Hedwig is very, very young. So Lacan's, I don't know, I can't say that name, Lacan's actually believed that fathers were the cultural norms that children were taught. So with the lack of a father figure, then Hedwig would not have had somebody to teach him what society expected of him, and Lacan would suggest the lack of this father figure would be the reason that Hedwig deviated from his normal heterosexual path and went down this other pathway.
And what about Hedwig's mother?
Hedwig's mother was just not very affectionate, and she was very standoffish. From a language standpoint, she taught him some very interesting lessons as a child. First of all, one of the bedtime stories that she told Hedwig was Plato's story, The Origins of Love. Now, The Origins of Love deals with three heavenly beings. There's the sun, which is male, the earth, which is female, and the moon, which is androgynous. So there were three different sexes and genders, not just the two that we're used to. And Zeus became very, very jealous of these three different genders and felt they were getting too powerful, and so he broke them apart with his lightning bolts and created 6 different people. So the end goal of this is to find your other half and reunite as the god that you once were. So Zeus left Nabals as a reminder of what happened to us, and then everybody seeks to be able to find their other half. The interesting thing about this to me is that the androgynous or moon people really seek to find the other half of their sex. So they are the heterosexuals looking for a male-female partnering, whereas the sun and the moon look for their same-sex partners. So, I'm sorry, the sun and the earth. So the earth would be looking for a female-to-female partnership, and the sun would be looking for a male-to-male partnership.
What does androgynous mean?
It means not male or female, just in between. Good question.
In addition to being language-based and suiting
Lacan's theory?
Lacan's theory, this also seems to describe Carl Jung's theories.
It really does. Jung based his theories on psychoanalysis also, but he really tended to focus on past stories and events and how those past stories and events created what we've become and what our analysis is today. So having this story of Plato's that the mother talked about really does fall under that theory.
Were there other teachings by his mother that shaped Hedwig?
Yes, in addition to the bedtime story, Hedwig's mom also taught Hedwig that it was really important to not be powerless, or to be powerless, actually, the opposite of what you would think. She said that absolute power would corrupt someone, and she compared Hitler and Jesus together because she said they had absolute power and that it corrupted them. And so she said it's better to be powerless than to be corrupt. So that really stuck with him because Hedwig, as he grew older, you can see how he avoided having power. He avoided that struggle. He wanted to be the follower in the relationship. Like he followed Luther to the United States, and with Tommy, even though he taught Tommy, he let Tommy have power over him. And it wasn't until he let go of his issues that he finally took control of his own power.
So let's move into real meat of story. Hedwig's relationship with Yitzhak and Tommy.
Isn't Yitzhak a funny name?
Yes, it is.
So Yitzhak is technically Hedwig's spouse, and she is a drag queen from Croatia, and Hedwig went to Croatia and was going to make her his opening act, but then Yitzhak was so good that Hedwig got jealous, and when she begged him to be able to come with him, he said, "As my mother taught me, you have to give something up to get what you want. And so what I'm going to make you give up is being a drag queen. So you can be a backup singer, but you must never ever wear a wig again." Because he was jealous of how she looked and how she sounded and of her talent. And so in doing this, Hedwig kind of was experimenting with power for the first time in his life. And he was also recreating the same situation in which he had been in as a child, where Yitzhak had to leave and change who she was to get what she wanted. And you can tell that they are really not very happy with each other. They say a lot of mean things, and they don't get along very well because of the power struggle that's happening between the two of them. And that Yitzhak is being repressed and is afraid to leave Hedwig because of immigration coming after her. And it's not until the very, very end of the show when Hedwig finally lets go of all of his issues and becomes true to himself that he's able to let Yitzhak become true to herself as well. And another interesting part about this is that Yitzhak is actually played by a female, so she's a drag queen played by a female instead of a drag queen played by a male, which is kind of an interesting component as far as the androgyny and such that happens in the show.
If Yitzhak is played by a female, then how will he change into a male when Hedwig forces him to give up his life as a drag queen?
So throughout the whole show, Yitzhak is actually dressed in male clothing. So she has very short hair, and she wears a dark suit, and she dresses up like a man. And then at the very end of the show, when Hedwig lets her have a wig finally, she comes out in a very, very ornate costume with big hair and feathers all over her head and a headdress, and she sings a really great song where she's dressed like a female and sounds like a female. And Hedwig is actually a man dressed up as a woman during the entire show.
Do they show things before Hedwig's sex transformation?
No, it's all done as a memory. So he's putting on a rock performance, and he tells all of this stuff as he is putting on the show in between songs.
And Tommy?
So Tommy is really the unexpressed desires of Hedwig. He is everything that Hedwig wishes he could be and isn't. So Tommy is another young person that is influenced by Hedwig, and Hedwig actually recreates Tommy as what she would like to be. Hedwig is the one that comes up with Tommy's name, which is Tommy Genosis, and Genosis is actually the Latin word for knowledge. So in that way, Hedwig's renaming Tommy as her knowledge that she passes on. And then in addition to that, Tommy and Hedwig look almost exactly alike in the show. And Hedwig talks about how Tommy is actually her other half that she's finally found from the Origins of Love song. And because they're so physically similar, at the same time that Hedwig is putting on her show on one side of the river in New York City, Tommy is putting on his show on the other side of the river in New York City. So occasionally the door opens and you hear bits and pieces of Tommy's show, and Hedwig is expecting Tommy to talk about how much she helped him, but really all Tommy talks about is how he can only count on himself. And that's really hard for Hedwig to hear that he doesn't credit her with all of his success. But at the same time, Hedwig is the only one who's helped Hedwig. And so it's also expressing what Hedwig feels is that nobody's helped her along the way, and she's done all of this stuff that she's done on her own. And then at the end of the show, it's very interesting because they kind of reunite the two characters, and Hedwig morphs into Tommy and sings the last song. So in the last song, when she's kind of bared her soul to everyone, and she has taken away all of the layers of her defenses, the person that's on the show, on the stage, is Tommy and Hedwig together. It's very crazy.
It looks like we're out of time for today. Thanks for joining us on Books and Plays today.